There's a strange kind of pain that no one talks about. It's not loud. It doesn't scream. It simply whispers, late at night, when the noise fades and you're finally alone with yourself. You don't belong here. You felt it, haven't you? In crowded rooms where you smiled, but something inside you felt hollow. In conversations where you played your part, laughed at the right time, nodded at the right places, but none of it felt real. And maybe you didn't know what to call it. You just knew, this isn't me. It wasn't depression. It wasn't weakness. It was the early echo of something sacred, your awakening. You see, not everyone is meant to blend in. Some are meant to awaken. And the awakening rarely comes in light and music. It arrives in silence, in discomfort, in the quiet realization that what the world offers is too small for the depth you carry. That's not arrogance. That's clarity. You didn't choose this feeling. It chose you, like a silent bell ringing far inside the heart, calling you out of the crowd, out of the performance, and into something deeper, the path of the chosen. But don't mistake chosen for superior. The chosen aren't better than others. They simply refuse to betray themselves just to belong. They'd rather walk alone in truth than be accepted in illusion. And that path, my friend, is not glamorous. It's not filled with applause. It's filled with shedding of old masks, old roles, old identities. And most of all, it's filled with silence. You will be misunderstood. You may be called cold, distant, different. But what they call strange is simply your soul stepping out of its shell. And that's where your real strength begins. Because in the stillness of that silence, something ancient awakens. Not a voice outside you, but the voice beneath all other voices. The one that says, this is not the end. This is the beginning. And in that moment, you don't need permission. You don't need validation. You simply remember who you are and why the noise of the world has always felt too loud for you. That's the call of the chosen. And if these words don't just make sense to your mind, but ring true in your body, in your gut, your chest, your breath, then you already know this isn't just a video. It's a mirror. And what you're feeling now, that's your soul recognizing itself. You're not broken. You're being revealed. And what comes next is the discovery of the powers that silence has been waiting to give you all along. Alone but not lost. Why silence builds you. Sometimes, the most transformative moments of your life don't begin with fireworks. They begin with distance. You didn't push people away. You just stopped pretending. And one by one, the noise fell away. The text slowed down. The invitation stopped. And suddenly, you were alone. At first, it feels like abandonment, like being dropped into a vast, empty desert with no compass and no map. The mind panics. Where did everyone go? But if you stay still long enough, something shifts. The silence that once felt like punishment starts to feel like presence. It's not loneliness, it's space. In Buddhism, we speak of emptiness not as void, but as openness, a fertile ground where truth can take root. Silence is that kind of ground. It clears away the artificial. It strips down the performative. And in that clearing, you begin to hear the voice you've been drowning out for years, your own. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul," and he was right. That's why people fear silence. It threatens to reveal too much. But for you, the one called out of the crowd, silence isn't a threat. It's an invitation, an initiation. In silence, you begin to see. You notice how much of your life was shaped by fear. The fear of being left out, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of not being enough. You realize how often you said yes when you meant no, how often you smiled when you wanted to cry, how often you stayed when your spirit was already gone. And in that seeing, there is healing. Because silence doesn't just expose the noise, it teaches you how to breathe beneath it. It shows you that you are not your thoughts. You are not your past. You are not the labels others gave you. You are the awareness behind it all, watching, steady, awake. This is the paradox of solitude. You feel most alone, right before you meet the part of you that was never alone. The observer, the witness, the unshakable presence within. In that space, you start to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You begin to feel whole, not because someone filled your emptiness, but because you stopped running from it. And what's beautiful is that the world doesn't even have to change for you to feel different. The same people, the same chaos, the same noise, but you move through it with a stillness that wasn't there before. You no longer need to prove, to please, to pretend. That is what silence builds. It doesn't make you louder. It makes you clear. And when you are clear, you are free. This is why monks choose the forest and mystics seek the mountain. Because in the absence of noise, the soul becomes audible. And in that silence, you don't lose the world. You rediscover yourself in it. The first power, the unshaken mind. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't dominate a room or raise its voice to be heard. It's the strength that stays silent in the middle of a storm, watching, breathing, waiting. That is the first power silence gives you, a mind that cannot be shaken. Most people react. They flinch, they fight, they collapse under pressure. Their peace depends on external things, the approval of others, the outcome of a meeting, the state of the world. But when your mind has been tempered in silence, you no longer rely on the outside to find balance inside. Buddhism calls this equanimity, a calm mind, balanced in gain and loss, praise and blame, joy and sorrow. But you don't have to remember the word. You already know the feeling. It's when something that would have broken you 5 years ago now passes like a breeze through open windows. It's when you respond, not react. When you breathe before you speak. When your stillness becomes your strength. You don't develop this kind of mind overnight. It's forged slowly, quietly, in the hours no one sees. In the moments when you sit with your anger instead of projecting it. When you observe your anxiety rather than obey it. When you stop arguing with reality and begin listening to it. This is why the ancients compared the mind to water. Disturbed, it reflects nothing. Still, it shows everything. The modern world, however, trains you to be the opposite. Always stimulated, always triggered, always reacting. You're taught that your feelings are facts, that your opinions must be defended, that silence is weakness. But the wise know silence is power, and clarity is born from stillness. When you train your mind to stay steady under pressure, people will not understand you. They'll call you cold, detached, emotionless. But stillness isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of mastery. You still feel the anger, the fear, the pain, but you've stopped letting them drive the car. And that changes everything. Because once your mind stops being a battlefield, it becomes a sanctuary. You stop looking for enemies. You stop taking things personally. You stop fighting ghosts from your past. And in that space, the space where nothing shakes you anymore, you begin to see the world not as a threat, but as a mirror, not as something to control, but as something to understand. This is why those with unshaken minds are often misunderstood. The world doesn't know what to do with someone it cannot trigger. But deep down, people recognize something different about you. They may not say it, but they feel it. The way you pause before reacting. The way you stay grounded while others spiral. The way your presence calms a room, without you needing to say a word. That's not a gift you were born with. That's a power you earned. And in a world addicted to reactivity, your calm becomes radical. Your stillness becomes sacred. Your clarity becomes unstoppable. The second power, the eye that sees the truth. Most people don't see the world. They see their wounds, their fears, their hopes projected onto everything around them. They hear someone's words, but miss the weight in their voice. They smile at a friend, but overlook the tightness in their jaw. They live surrounded by masks, including their own, and never question what lies underneath. But when you've sat in silence long enough, when you've trained your mind to stay still and unshaken, something unexpected happens. You begin to see, not with your eyes, but with your awareness. You see through the noise, the performance, the pretenses. You start picking up the subtle signals most ignore. You notice when someone's kindness is laced with resentment, when a compliment is more about control than connection, when someone says, "I'm fine," but their energy says, "Please see me." And it's not because you're paranoid. It's because you've learned to read what's not being said. In Buddhism, this is the beginning of prajna, intuitive wisdom. It's not just knowledge. It's the quiet knowing that arises when your mind is clear and your heart is steady. You no longer believe everything you see. You sense deeper layers behind every word, every gesture, every silence. But this power didn't come from books. It came from pain, from walking through your own darkness and coming out the other side with your eyes wide open. When you've had to sit with your own lies, the ones you told yourself to survive, you become very good at noticing when others are doing the same. This is why the eye that sees the truth often brings discomfort, not to you, but to others. Because the moment you start seeing clearly, you stop playing along. You stop nodding when something feels off. You stop accepting surface answers when your soul knows there's more underneath. And that's threatening. People aren't used to being seen. They're used to being performed for. So when you walk into a room and look at someone, not with judgment, but with real presence, it unsettles them. Because they realize you can see past the mask they forgot they were wearing. But that's also why this power is sacred. Because while others remain trapped in illusions, you move through the world with clarity. You know when to speak and when to stay silent. You know who to trust and who to love from a distance. You can feel the storm behind someone's smile, the story in their silence, the ache in their strength. And that allows you to connect on a level most people never reach. This is the second power silence gives you. The ability to see without being fooled, to perceive without being poisoned, to witness without needing to control. You no longer seek to manipulate or escape. You simply see. And when you can see clearly, you can walk wisely. Because the eye that sees the truth is not hard. It is compassionate. It doesn't expose others to shame them. It sees them so they can be free. And in a world addicted to illusion, to be truly seen is one of the rarest gifts you can offer. The third power, razor clarity in a loud world. Have you ever stood in a crowd and felt your thoughts blur? Not because you're unsure, but because the world is shouting too many things at once, and none of them feel like yours. Everyone's rushing. Everyone's certain. Everyone's broadcasting their opinions like gospel. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a whisper, slow down. None of this is clear. In a world that celebrates noise, clarity is rebellion. This is the third power silence gives you, razor clarity. When you begin to quiet the chaos inside, something unexpected happens. You start to see not only what matters, but what doesn't. And in that moment, you gain something most people spend a lifetime chasing, direction. Buddhism often speaks of right view, not as a moral code, but as a kind of inner compass. When your mind is still, you don't just know what to do, you feel it. You sense when a conversation is off, when a job looks perfect but doesn't feel aligned, when a relationship feels heavy, even if nothing's wrong. And while others get caught in overthinking, paralyzed by analysis, confused by their own voices, you move like a blade through fog. Not faster, just sharper. This kind of clarity doesn't come from reading more or thinking harder. It comes from stillness, from sitting in your own mind long enough that all the false layers peel away, and what's left is simple, unmistakable truth. Clarity feels like peace, not because life is easy, but because your choices no longer come from fear. And once you start making decisions from clarity, everything changes. You stop chasing what others call success. You stop compromising what your gut screams against. You stop needing to justify why something doesn't feel right, because you trust that what's clear to you doesn't have to make sense to others. In this kind of clarity, there is power, quiet power. You become the calm one in the crisis, the voice that doesn't need to speak loudly, the one who sees what's coming before others do, not because you're magical, but because you've cleared the static. And make no mistake, the world will not understand this. They'll call you cold, indecisive, maybe even arrogant, but they don't know what it took for you to get here. They don't know how long you sat in silence, questioning everything, burning off every illusion until only truth remained. And they don't have to, because clarity doesn't need applause. It just needs space. This is why those who cultivate silence become the sharpest minds, not because they know more, but because they carry less. Less noise, less confusion, less need to be everything to everyone. And in a world this loud, to be clear is to be free. The fourth power, feeling what others hide. Some people walk into a room and shift the energy without saying a word. You've probably felt that before. The quiet heaviness behind someone's smile, the tension in the air before anything goes wrong, the sadness tucked neatly behind perfectly chosen words. You can't explain how you know it. You just feel it. That's the fourth power silence gives you. The ability to feel what others hide. Most people don't know what they're carrying. Their pain has become background noise. They've built personalities around their wounds, relationships on top of their unresolved grief. And the world rewards performance, not presence. So they keep smiling, joking, achieving, while something inside them quietly breaks. But when you've spent enough time sitting with your own pain, something extraordinary happens. You become fluent in the unspoken. You recognize the tremble in someone's voice not as weakness, but as history. You see through defensiveness and hear the fear underneath. You sense when someone isn't fine, even when they say they are. It's not about being psychic. It's about being present. In Buddhism, compassion isn't just about helping others. It's about seeing them clearly, not as their masks, but as their suffering. And suffering, once seen, softens. This is why your presence makes people feel exposed. Not because you judge them, but because your attention is undivided. And in a world starving for realness, that kind of presence can be overwhelming. People can't hide from someone who isn't distracted. You read more than words. You read silence. You read posture. You read the shift in breath when a question hits too close. And this sensitivity, once painful, becomes your gift. Because now you no longer chase connection by speaking louder. You create connection by listening deeper. You begin to realize that most people don't need advice. They need space. Not solutions, but safety. And when you offer that, not through words, but through presence, something shifts. People cry around you and don't know why. They feel lighter after talking to you, even if you barely spoke. That's not coincidence. That's resonance. But this gift comes with weight. Because while you feel others, few can feel you. While you hold space for their pain, few can hold yours. And that's why this power can feel lonely. But don't let it harden you. Don't let it turn into bitterness. Because the world needs exactly what you are. Someone who sees without judging, feels without absorbing, holds space without needing to fix. This is emotional depth, not as a burden, but as a superpower. And while most will never understand it, those who do will never forget you. Not because you saved them, but because you truly saw them, in a way they hadn't even seen themselves. The fifth power, turning time alone into strength. Time alone is one of life's most misunderstood gifts. People fear it, run from it, numb themselves to survive it. But what if it wasn't meant to be survived? What if time alone wasn't a punishment, but a forge? This is the fifth power silence gives you: the ability to turn time alone into strength. Most people spend their lives filling space with noise, distractions, relationships, obligations, not because they're weak, but because stillness terrifies them. In stillness, there's no one left to perform for, no one to blame, just you, your thoughts, and your truth. At first, that truth can feel heavy. You see the regrets you've buried, the patterns you've repeated, the dreams you abandoned not because they weren't real, but because someone else told you they were unrealistic. It's not easy to sit with all that. That's why so many don't. But you stayed. And in that staying, you began to change. While others rushed to fill time, you studied it. You learned that time doesn't heal everything, but it reveals everything. It shows you who's meant to stay, what truly matters, what version of yourself keeps showing up when no one else does. And when you begin to live from that version, the raw, unpolished, unguarded self, that's when time becomes your ally, not your enemy. You use time to build, not distract, to reflect, not escape. You begin to notice the patterns in your thoughts, the energy of your emotions, the cycles in your decisions. You stop blaming the world and start understanding your role in it. That's maturity. That's mastery. In Buddhism, there's a concept called bhavana. It means cultivation, like tending a garden, not by force, but by presence. That's what time alone becomes, your garden. And every hour spent in silence, every day you didn't run, that was you planting, watering, waiting. And one day, without announcement, something blooms. You speak more clearly. You make decisions with calm. You no longer rush to prove, to explain, to win. Because your roots are deep now, and deep roots don't fear the wind. That's what makes this power different from the others. The first gave you stillness. The second, vision. The third, clarity. The fourth, depth. But this one gives you endurance. It's the quiet knowing that while others spent years running in circles, you were walking slowly, but forward. And now, you're further than they ever imagined. Not because you were faster, but because you were faithful to the silence. And in the end, that's what sets the chosen apart. They didn't waste their isolation. They forged themselves in it. Living as one of the chosen. When the noise fades, when the crowd disperses, when the lights go down, what remains is you. Not the version you showed the world, not the roles you played. Just you, in your most unguarded form. And if you've walked this far, through the silence, through the shedding, through the stillness, then you're not lost. You're living as one of the chosen. But what does that really mean? It doesn't mean you're better. It doesn't mean you've arrived. It means you've chosen to stop betraying yourself to fit in. You've chosen to stay in the discomfort long enough for it to turn into wisdom. You've chosen to sit with the questions rather than chase easy answers. You've chosen to live awake. And that changes everything. Because once you've developed these inner powers, stillness, vision, clarity, depth, endurance, you no longer move through the world the same way. You don't react like you used to. You don't reach for distractions like before. You don't panic when things fall apart because you've already been through your own unraveling. You become quieter, but not empty, full of presence, full of insight, full of a kind of peace that doesn't need to be proven, just lived. And people will feel it. They might not understand you. Some might even distance themselves. But others, the rare ones, they will recognize something in you. Not because you're loud, but because your silence carries weight. Not because you preach, but because you live what you've learned. This is the paradox. The more inward your journey, the more outward your impact. You inspire not by performing, but by embodying. Not by talking louder, but by listening deeper. Not by fighting for attention, but by offering real presence. The kind that makes people feel seen without ever being judged. That's how the chosen live. Not separate from the world, but not owned by it either. Rooted, awake, quietly powerful. So if this journey spoke to something deep in you, if it felt less like watching a video and more like remembering something you've always known, then let it linger. Let it sit with you. And when you're ready, pass it on. Share this with someone whose silence has been misunderstood, whose strength looks quiet, whose journey is unfolding in the dark. Subscribe to Walk With Us. This isn't just content, it's a path. And we walk it together, one truth at a time. If you found value in this, like it. Leave a comment with what resonated most. And when you're ready for the next step, check out the video waiting for you at the end of this one. Until then, stay rooted. Stay awake. You are not alone. You are simply one of the few who remembered.